The Culley Collection of woodblock prints was given to Pomona College in 1959. The reasons that the daughters of John Henry Culley decided to make this somewhat extraordinary gift remain mysterious. John Culley did not attend Pomona, the daughters did not attend Pomona, his son did not attend Pomona. But what we do know is that the 187 relief prints represent this flourishing of renewed interest in relief printing in the early 20th century. This is the first time since 1959 that we've endeavored to really study the collection as a holistic entity.
What's interesting about the Culley collection is that he had this kind of focus on especially the black and white block print, that he was so kind of singularly interested in that form of printmaking, and that he really was looking across countries, across artist groups for this type of artistic practice.
What Culley was doing, he obviously focused on woodcut, and secondly, given his life dates, he was actually focusing on contemporary woodcut as it happened in its time. That means is that Culley actually avoided any kind of sort of later canonization of these works. His interest was not, among the German expressionists, who is kind of considered A rank, B rank, or something like that, or second generation. There was basically a kind of a very refreshing interest and curiosity about all things woodcut.
While he was very interested in all these artists, he was also incredibly interested in the woodcut as a medium. There's a huge range of what's done technically with the medium in the Culley collection. You have very intricate, structured works, and then that's juxtaposed by kind of the very classic jagged lines, more expressionist work of the German expressionist artists in the late 19th and early 20th century.
So again, of these 187 prints, we have artists who are working in England, in France, in Germany, in Central Europe. Then later, the collection comes to reflect artistic practice here in the United States as well. What the collection itself shows is just the wide range of expressive potential that a relatively simple form of image making can achieve. John Culley was born in Northumberland, England, northern England, close to the border of Scotland. He comes to the US after his studies at Brasenose College, Oxford, and somehow falls in love with the American West. So decides to spend a number of years as a rancher in New Mexico.
We know his biography very well, and he obviously published his book about his ranching life, but there really isn't much that's reflected about the nature of his collecting, and so it's kind of been a puzzle that we've had to put together to kind of piece together this alternate view of who John H. Culley was and why he collected these prints.
But the one published article that we have related to art does appear in the late 1920s in a journal called The Argus that was published out of San Francisco.
Found an entire essay where he described the nature of his prints, why he selected them, talked about his different interests in printmaking, and why he was interested in woodcut specifically. And something that I thought was really striking from that was he talked about how he found the method of making a woodcut almost more noble in a way because there's no chemical interaction. I've also found out through newspaper archival research that he was very dedicated to spreading information and knowledge about his collection. He showcased it across the West Coast, gave lectures on it.
So what's been surprising or kind of, delightful to appreciate about the Culley collection is that John Culley seemed to be most interested in the technique itself. What could artists achieve through this relatively simple and rather democratically accessible form of art making? They never collected more than maybe 4 prints by the same artist. So the Culley Collection doesn't represent any single artist in depth. But what it does do is put really well-known figures like Ketta Kolbitz or Ernst Ludwig Kirchner alongside artists who we have yet to really celebrate. Someone like Emma Schlangenhausen or Hua-Min Chang. These artists who, through the eyes of our students, we get to rediscover and we hope, bring forward and celebrate in this broader context. At the Benton Museum of Art, we take our role as a teaching museum very seriously. I was delighted to have the chance to develop a class called Print Cultures that I offered in fall of 2024.
As soon as I came into the class, the very first day, she gave us the database of all the pieces in the collection and said, pick some ones you like. And then when we came to class the next week, they were just magically there. And that was just such a cool experience walking in and seeing the art that I'd seen on the screen, and now just seeing it in front of me, getting to actually touch it, handle it, look at what's on the recto and the verso, the front and the back.
The students had to request to be in the class because I wanted them to know before they signed up that we would be working together to prepare this exhibition.
And then after the conclusion of the class, Professor Sancho Lobis asked me if I wanted to continue as an intern. That isn't really something I'd even thought about, but I was like, yes, of course, because I absolutely enjoyed the class, and that opened a whole other can of worms in terms of research. I think what's important about such a physical process, especially in an increasingly digital world, is as art tends to rely more and more on digital tools, we kind of lose the intimacy that an artist has with their medium, because you have this technology as an interlocutor between artist and their art. By understanding and kind of coming back to what it means to physically interact and have to deal with the physical qualities that can't be reversed of a print, it requires you to just reckon much more with what it means to physically create art.
So much of the history of modern printmaking has been about artists like the German Expressionists, who really centered especially the woodcut in their practice.
The German Expressionist was very, very dominated by woodcut as a technique, and that actually very much entered I would call it the modern canon.
It's not just German artists who are practicing that way. It actually starts with artists like Edvard Munch and Paul Gauguin. Paul Gauguin's represented in the collection as well. And then it comes to Germany. They were very interested in saying that they kind of came to these things independently, but really they were influenced early on by Jugendstil, by Art Nouveau, by French artists, and by other modern artists working in this mode.
This is a collection where the idea is to be sort of very broad, very encyclopedic, and therefore, by your casting your net out wide in what sort of happened at the time, you actually catch so many artists which the history later on, the establishing of a canon, actually forgot about.
Almost 100 years ago, we have John Cully talking about women artists. Kind of remarkable. In his article published in 1928, he says, yes, the best things being done in England are being done by women artists, and don't miss the chance to pay attention.
Because Cully was interested in such a non-canonical way, and there was this kind of universal curiosity there was never that filter which would relegate the woman artist to kind of a second rank, because he wasn't after that. He was just interested in different artistic voices.
In terms of the women artists, what I think is so interesting about the Culley Collection is there are so many of them. There are so many artists in this collection that we may have heard of before or may never have heard of, like Wanda Gag, who was a children's book illustrator but also made a lot of prints, or Emma Schlangenhausen from Austria, whose prints are just amazing, but she's not a household name by any means.
When I started researching more about Emma herself, I found that she was actually the founder of one of the earliest women's artist unions in Europe. She initially broke into the arts through the applied arts and worked as a poster maker and a graphic artist for a while, but then wanted to kind of make her break into the fine arts and started producing prints like Rotterdam that we have in the collection today. And so by founding this artist union, she helped other women artists be able to find funding to host their own exhibitions and really created a pathway for artists at the time.
On the one hand, it reflects how many women were active as printmakers, and in many ways, printmaking was a practice that women could get involved in quite easily because there was ways of accessing the materials of printmaking without having kind of formal artistic training. It was also a practice that you could do sort of relatively inexpensively or do on your own time, and that you could be published.
I'm excited to share this collection with our visitors in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, I think some people will be surprised to find out that we have examples of really important prints by very well-known artists such as Emil Nolde, Vasily Kandinsky, names that people who love 20th century art will have heard before. In some cases, our research has shown that we have impressions of prints that the Museum of Modern Art in New York does not have, or that the British Museum in London does not have. We're also really happy for people to fall in love with artists that they've never heard of before. So an artist named Blanding Sloan, who operated a print shop in Carmel by the Sea, California, where there was an artist colony. Lionel Lindsay, who was from Australia but had an audience in the UK and had a special interest in representing birds. There's a real range of established history for the artists that we're representing, but we hope that the works themselves will demonstrate why they are important and why we feel so privileged to be custodians of these artistic legacies.